On my wife's birthday, I handed her a gift wrapped in silence, and inside it was the truth I had been living with for months. My name is Ethan Carter, I'm 37 years old, and until recently, I thought I understood what trust looked like. I work in IT, the kind of job where patterns matter, where small inconsistencies stand out if you stare long enough. That's probably why I noticed it before anyone else would have. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. No obvious lies, no late-night confessions, no messages lighting up her phone at 2 a.m. It was quieter than that. Olivia started coming home 10, maybe 15 minutes later than usual. Not enough to question, just enough to register. Her tone shifted too, subtle but real, like someone slightly out of sync with the rhythm we had built over 8 years of marriage. We had a house in the suburbs outside Chicago, a place with a 2-car garage, trimmed hedges, and neighbors who waved every morning. From the outside, we looked stable. Predictable. Safe. That's what made it so easy to ignore the first crack. I told myself it was work stress, maybe new responsibilities at her office, maybe I was just overthinking things. But once your mind starts tracking patterns, it doesn't stop. I noticed how she angled her phone screen away from me without realizing it, how conversations became shorter, more efficient, like she was conserving energy for something else. One night, I stood in our kitchen watching her rinse a glass under warm water, and I realized something that didn't feel dramatic in the moment, but changed everything after. I didn't trust the version of reality I was being shown anymore. And when that happens, you have two choices. You ask questions and risk hearing a lie, or you look for answers yourself. I chose the second. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even let it show on my face. The next day, I ordered a set of small indoor cameras online. Nothing complicated, just enough to cover the living room and the entryway. I installed them while she was out with her friends, careful, precise, like I was setting up a system at work. By the time she walked back through the front door that night, smiling, asking how my day was, everything was already in place. What she didn't know was that I had stopped being just her husband in that moment. I had become an observer. A witness. And once you start watching, really watching, you don't just see what's there. You see what's been hidden in plain sight all along. The first few days there was nothing. Normal routines, ordinary moments, the kind of footage that would bore anyone else. But I kept watching. Because in my world, patterns always reveal themselves eventually. And when they didn't explode. They unfolded quietly, frame by frame, until the truth wasn't something I suspected anymore. It was something I couldn't unsee. I watched the footage the same way I review system logs, slow, methodical, without emotion, at least that is what I told myself in the beginning. Every night after Olivia went to bed, I would sit in my home office with the lights off, the glow of the monitor reflecting off the desk, and I would scroll through hours of nothing. Empty rooms, sunlight shifting across the hardwood floor, the quiet rhythm of a normal life playing out in silence. At first, it almost reassured me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had built a problem out of nothing. But patterns do not lie, they just take time to reveal themselves. On the fourth day, I noticed the first deviation. It was small enough that most people would have missed it. Olivia came home at 6:12 p.m., earlier than usual, set her bag down, and stood in the living room for a moment longer than necessary, like she was waiting for something. She checked her phone, typed a message, and then adjusted the throw pillows on the couch twice, even though they were already perfectly aligned. It was not what she did, it was how she did it. There was intention behind it. 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I remember pausing the video right there, my finger hovering over the trackpad, my chest tightening in a way I could not quite explain. When I pressed play again, I already knew something had shifted. A man stepped into frame, casual, comfortable, like he had been there before. Daniel Brooks. I did not know his name yet, but I would. Olivia greeted him with a smile I had not seen in a long time, the kind that reached her eyes without effort. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, no distance. Just familiarity. They sat on the couch, talking at first, close but not crossing any obvious line, at least not one that could be pointed to in a single frame. If you watched it without context, you could almost explain it away. A coworker stopping by, a friend dropping in. But I kept watching. Minutes turned into an hour. Their posture shifted, their voices lowered, their space closed in. It was not one moment that broke everything. It was the accumulation of small, undeniable details stacking on top of each other until the picture became clear. I did not yell. I did not shut the laptop. I did not even move. I just sat there, absorbing it, letting the reality settle into something solid and permanent. The next day, Olivia kissed me goodbye like she always did, grabbed her keys, and walked out the front door without a second thought. I kissed her back. I told her to have a good day. And that was the moment I understood something that changed the way I moved through every second after. She was living one version of our life. I was living another. And only one of us knew the truth. After that first night, I stopped looking for a single moment to explain what I had seen, because there was no single moment that could carry the weight of it. Instead, I began to track everything. Dates, times, durations. I built a quiet timeline in my head, one that ran parallel to the life Olivia thought we were still living together. Every evening, after dinner, after the small talk, after the routine questions about work and errands, I would excuse myself, sit in the same chair, and watch. The footage became less shocking and more structured, almost predictable. He came on Tuesdays at first, always between 6 and 7 in the evening, always leaving before 9. Then Thursdays started appearing. Then the occasional Saturday afternoon when I was supposed to be out running errands or meeting a friend. It was not chaos. It was a pattern. And patterns are something you can map. I noticed how Olivia prepared the space before he arrived, how she adjusted the lighting, straightened surfaces that were already clean, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror as if she was stepping into a version of herself that did not exist when I was home. What stayed with me was not just that it was happening, but how natural it looked to her. There was no hesitation in her movements, no sign that she was doing something she needed to hide from herself. That was the part that settled the deepest. Weeks turned into a month, and then another. I stopped counting in days and started thinking in phases. Phase 1 was disbelief, where every new piece of footage felt like it might still be explained if I just looked at it from a different angle. Phase 2 was confirmation, where the explanations ran out and all that was left was what was actually there. By the time I reached Phase 3, something inside me had changed in a way that was hard to put into words. I was no longer reacting. I was observing. I would sit across from Olivia at the dinner table, listen to her talk about her day, nod at the right moments, even smile when she expected it, all while knowing exactly what the previous Tuesday at 6:18 p.m. had looked like in that same room. It created a strange kind of distance, like we were sharing a space but not the same reality. I did not confront her. I did not slip or hint or test her with questions. There was no point. I already had the answers, and asking would only give her a chance to replace them with something else. Instead, I let it continue. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood something that only became clear after watching enough of it. If I acted too early, it would become an argument. If I waited long enough, it would become undeniable. And I was not interested in arguing. I was interested in ending it on terms that could not be rewritten. By the second month, the footage stopped feeling like something I needed to check and started feeling like something I already knew before I even pressed play. The predictability of it all was what made it sink deeper than any sudden shock ever could. Olivia moved through those days with precision, like she had built a schedule around a version of her life I was never meant to see. And the strangest part was how normal everything else remained. We still had dinner together most nights. We still talked about bills, weekend plans, and the kind of small decisions that make up a shared life. She would ask me if I wanted to order takeout or cook, and I would answer like nothing had changed. But everything had. I began to notice how easy it was for her to switch between those two versions of herself. One moment she was standing in our kitchen, asking me if I wanted extra cheese on the pizza, and the next day, At almost the exact same time, she was standing in that same space, waiting for someone else to walk through the door. It was not dramatic. It was not chaotic. It was controlled. That control told me this was not a mistake. This was a choice she had been making over and over again. I started paying attention to details outside the footage as well. Receipts left on the counter, timestamps on shared accounts, the way she phrased things when she talked about her schedule. It all lined up too cleanly to ignore. There was a moment one evening that stayed with me more than anything else. We were sitting on the couch, the same couch I had watched on screens so many times, and she leaned her head on my shoulder like she used to. For a second, everything felt familiar, almost convincing. But then I remembered exactly what that same space had looked like just 48 hours earlier, and the feeling shifted into something colder. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. That was the night I stopped hoping for an explanation that would make any of it make sense. I was not waiting for her to come clean. I was not waiting for a mistake or a confession. I already had everything I needed. From that point on, my focus changed completely. I was no longer watching to understand what was happening. I was watching to decide what I was going to do with it. I began organizing the footage, saving clips, labeling dates, building something that could not be dismissed or explained away. It was not about proving anything to myself anymore. It was about making sure that when the moment came, there would be no room for doubt, no space for denial, no version of the story that could be rewritten. And the more I built that, the more one thought settled in my mind, steady and unshaken. This was not going to end with a conversation. It was going to end with a decision. And when that decision was made, it would not be loud, it would not be messy, and it would not be something she could see coming. It would be final. By the time the third month began, the situation had fully shifted from something emotional into something strategic. I was no longer reacting to what I saw, and I was no longer questioning what it meant. I understood it completely. What I needed now was control over how it would end. I started thinking less like a husband and more like someone preparing a case. Every clip I saved had a purpose. Every timestamp mattered. I created folders, labeled them by date, cross-referenced them with my own schedule, building a timeline that showed not just what happened, but when and how consistently it happened. It was not obsessive. It was precise. During the day, I went to work like nothing had changed. I sat through meetings, responded to emails, fixed problems that made sense in a way my personal life no longer did. At home, I played my role perfectly. I asked Olivia about her day, listened to her answers, even laughed at the right moments. And she never questioned it. That was the part that stayed with me. She never once looked at me like she thought I knew. Not a single hesitation, not a single second of doubt in her expression. It told me everything I needed to know about how secure she felt in the version of reality she had created. Around that time, I started to notice something else. Her birthday was coming up. It was still a few weeks away, but she had already begun mentioning it in small ways. A restaurant she wanted to try, a dress she had been looking at online, a casual comment about keeping the evening simple this year. It was normal conversation, the kind couples have without thinking. But to me, it stood out immediately. Not because of what she said, but because of what it represented. A fixed point in time. A moment that could not be moved or reinterpreted later. That was when the idea first formed, not as a dramatic plan, but as a quiet realization. If everything had been happening in secret, if every detail had been carefully hidden behind routine and normalcy, then the ending needed to be just as controlled, but impossible to ignore. I did not rush into it. I let the thought sit, let it develop the same way everything else had. Over the next few days I refined it. I contacted a lawyer during my lunch break, kept the conversation brief and factual. No emotions, no long explanations. Just the timeline, the evidence, and the outcome I was preparing for. He asked if I was sure. I told him yes. There was no hesitation in my voice because there was no hesitation left in me. Papers were drafted, reviewed, and finalized faster than I expected. I kept them in a plain folder in my office drawer, out of sight, but never out of mind. At night, I still watched the footage, but it felt different now. Not heavier, not more painful, just complete. Like I had already reached the end, and everything else was just waiting for the right moment to catch up. Olivia, meanwhile, moved closer to her birthday without a single sign that anything was different. She talked about reservations, about inviting a few friends, about how she did not want anything too big this year. I nodded, agreed, even offered to handle the planning. She smiled when I said that. A genuine smile. And I realized something in that moment that settled everything into place. She believed completely in the life she thought we were still living. And that belief was exactly why what was coming next would land the way it needed to. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just undeniable. The closer we got to her birthday, the more everything around me felt like it was moving on two separate tracks, one visible and one completely hidden beneath it. Olivia was focused on details that would have mattered to me once: what restaurant we should go to, whether we should invite 6 people or 8, what kind of cake she wanted, the kind of conversations that fill space when everything feels normal. I let her talk. I agreed where it made sense. I even made suggestions, small ones, just enough to keep the illusion intact. But underneath that, every decision I made had a different purpose. I chose the restaurant she mentioned, not because it was her favorite, but because it had a private dining room. I confirmed the guest list she suggested, knowing exactly who would be there when everything shifted. I made the reservation myself, spoke to the manager, arranged the timing down to the minute. To anyone else, it would have looked like a husband planning a thoughtful evening. And in a way, it was. Just not in the way she believed. At the same time, I finalized everything on my end. The documents were reviewed again, printed on clean paper, placed in a simple envelope with no markings. No dramatic presentation, no hint of what it contained. Just a standard folder that could have held anything. I also selected the footage carefully. Not hours of it, not overwhelming, just enough to show a clear, undeniable pattern. A beginning, a middle, and an end. Something that could not be dismissed as a misunderstanding or explained away as a one-time mistake. I transferred it onto a small drive and tested it more than once, making sure there would be no technical issues, no delays, no room for interruption. Everything needed to work exactly as intended. The week of her birthday, Olivia seemed lighter, almost excited in a way I had not seen in a long time. She talked about turning a new page, about wanting this year to feel different, better. She said it casually one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner, her voice soft, almost hopeful. I remember pausing for a second, looking at her, and realizing how complete the separation between us had become. She was speaking about a future that no longer included me, even if she did not know it yet. I nodded, said that sounded like a good idea. And that was the truth, just not in the way she meant it. The night before her birthday, I did not check the footage. I did not need to. There was nothing left to confirm. Instead, I sat in my office with the envelope in front of me, my hand resting on it for a moment longer than necessary. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what it represented. This was the end of something that had taken years to build, reduced to a few sheets of paper and a set of decisions made in silence. The next morning, everything moved forward exactly as planned. Olivia got ready, smiling, talking about the dinner, about how she was glad we were keeping it simple. I watched her the same way I had been watching everything else for months, carefully, without reacting. Because by then, I was no longer part of the version of the story she believed in. I was just waiting for the moment when both versions would finally collide. The restaurant was exactly the way I expected it to be: dim lighting, low conversation, the kind of place where everything feels contained within its own walls. Olivia walked in beside me, smiling, her hand brushing lightly against my arm as the host led us to the private dining room I had reserved. She looked relaxed, confident, completely at ease in a moment she believed was hers. Our friends were already there, a small group, just like she wanted. Familiar faces, people who had seen us together for years, People who had no idea they were about to witness the end of something they thought was stable. Olivia greeted them with warmth, laughter, the same version of herself I had watched play out so many times from a distance. I took my seat across from her, placed the envelope beside me on the table, and let the evening unfold. The first part was exactly what anyone would expect. Drinks were ordered, light conversation filled the room, stories were shared, small jokes passed back and forth. Olivia looked at me more than once, smiling in a way that would have meant something different to me before all of this. Now it just felt like part of the performance. I responded when spoken to, nodded when appropriate, kept my tone even and steady. There was no tension in my voice, no sign that anything was out of place. And that was important. Because the moment only works when it arrives without warning. Dinner came and went, plates cleared, glasses refilled. At one point, someone suggested a toast, and Olivia laughed, lifting her glass slightly as if she already knew what she wanted to say. But I spoke first. Not loudly, not abruptly, just enough to shift the attention in the room. I picked up the envelope slowly, holding it in my hand for a brief second before setting it down in front of her. The room quieted, not completely, but enough for people to notice the change. Olivia looked at it, then back at me, a small crease forming between her brows, not concern yet, just curiosity. I met her eyes, calm, steady, the same way I had been for months. "Happy birthday," I said. My voice did not rise, did not fall, it stayed level, controlled. She smiled at first, the kind of polite smile you give when you are not sure what is happening but you expect it to be something good. Her fingers moved to the edge of the envelope, sliding it open without hesitation. There was a moment, a brief pause, where nothing shifted yet. Just paper being unfolded, eyes scanning lines of text that had already been decided long before this night. Then it happened. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in stages. Her expression changed in small increments, confusion first, then disbelief, then something deeper settling in as the meaning caught up with the words. The room felt different immediately, like the air itself had tightened. Someone across the table shifted in their seat, another person glanced at me, then back at Olivia, unsure of where to look. But I did not say anything else. I did not explain, I did not justify. I simply reached into my jacket, placed the small drive on the table beside the envelope, and left it there. No instructions, no commentary. Just the final piece, waiting. Olivia's eyes lifted from the papers to me, searching for something, an answer, a reaction, anything that would make sense of what she was holding. But there was nothing left to give her. Because everything that needed to be said had already been said, just not in words. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The quiet in the room was not natural, it was the kind that settles in when something shifts too quickly for people to process. Olivia was still holding the papers, her eyes moving over the same lines again as if they might change the second time. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge, not enough to crumple them, just enough to show that the control she had a moment ago was slipping. She looked at the drive, then back at me, and I could see the questions forming before she even said anything. "Ethan, what is this?" she asked, her voice lower now, not the confident tone she had carried all evening, but something uncertain, something searching. I did not answer right away. I let the moment sit, let the weight of everything I had already placed in front of her do the work. Around us, our friends shifted uncomfortably, their attention divided between wanting to understand and wanting to disappear from the situation entirely. One of them reached for their glass, another looked down at their plate as if it might offer an escape. The room felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. Olivia's voice came again, slightly sharper this time, trying to regain footing. "Is this a joke?" That question might have meant something months ago. Now it just sounded like distance, like someone trying to hold on to a version of reality that was already gone. I shook my head once, slow, controlled. "No." That was all I said. Just one word, steady, leaving no space for interpretation. Her gaze dropped back to the papers, and I watched as the understanding settled in fully this time. Not confusion anymore. Not disbelief. Just recognition. She knew what it was. She just had not expected to see it here, like this, with no warning. Her eyes moved to the drive again, lingering there longer this time. She did not touch it. She did not need to. The presence of it alone was enough. It represented everything she thought had been hidden, everything she believed had been contained within a version of her life I was never supposed to see. One of our friends finally spoke, quietly, asking if everything was okay, the kind of question people ask when they already know the answer is no. Olivia did not respond to them. She was still looking at me, searching for something that was no longer there. An explanation. A reaction. Maybe even anger. But I gave her none of it. Because anger would have made this familiar. This was not familiar. This was final. I reached for my glass, took a small sip, and set it back down without breaking eye contact. There was nothing left to add, nothing left to clarify. The timeline, the evidence, the decision, it had all been made long before we sat down at that table. This was just the moment it became visible. Olivia's shoulders shifted slightly, like she was about to speak again, but the words did not come right away. Instead, there was a pause, a long one, where the entire room seemed to wait for something that was not going to happen. Because there was no version of this where it turned into a conversation, no version where it could be explained away or negotiated back into something manageable. It had already moved past that point. And in that silence, with everyone watching, with the truth sitting in front of her in plain form, I realized something with complete clarity. This was the first time in months that we were both in the same reality. And there was nothing left to say. Olivia finally inhaled like someone coming up from deep water, her grip loosening slightly on the papers as the reality settled into something she could no longer push away. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then tried once more, her voice quieter now, almost careful, as if choosing the wrong word might make everything worse. "Ethan, we need to talk about this." It was a simple sentence, one that had probably solved 100 smaller problems over the years. But this was not one of those problems. I looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a kind of distance that had taken months to build. "We are past that," I said, my tone steady, unchanged. The words did not land loudly, but they settled in the room with weight. One of our friends shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. Another reached for their phone before stopping halfway, unsure if leaving would make things better or worse. Olivia's eyes flickered between me, the papers, and the drive, like she was trying to find a way to rearrange the pieces into something that made sense. But there was no rearranging it. Everything was already in its final place. She pushed the envelope slightly away from her, not far, just enough to create space between her and what it represented. "This is not how you handle something like this," she said, her voice gaining a slight edge, not anger, but resistance, the last attempt to regain control. I did not interrupt her. I let her finish, let the words come out the way they needed to. Because I understood something she was only just realizing. This was not about how it was handled. It was about what had already been done. I nodded once, acknowledging what she said without agreeing with it. "Maybe not," I replied calmly. "But it is how I am handling it." There was no escalation, no raised voices, no scene beyond what had already unfolded. Just a quiet, controlled ending in a room that was not prepared for it. Olivia looked down again, her expression shifting into something heavier now, something closer to acceptance than denial. Not complete, not yet, but enough to understand that there was no version of this that went back to what it was. The drive still sat untouched between us, small, almost insignificant in size, but carrying more weight than anything else on the table. She did not reach for it. She did not need to. She already knew. I stood up slowly, not abruptly, not in a way that would draw attention, but enough to signal that my part in this was finished. The chair moved back with a soft sound against the floor, and for a brief second, everyone in the room seemed to pause again, watching without knowing what to do next. I placed a few bills on the table, enough to cover everything, and looked at Olivia one last time. There was no anger left in me, no need to say anything else. The past few months had taken care of that. "Happy birthday," I said again, the same way I had earlier, calm, even, without emphasis. Then I turned and walked out of the room. The hallway outside felt quieter, the air cooler, like stepping out of something that had been building for a long time and finally reached its end. I did not look back. There was nothing left behind that I needed to see again. Outside, the night was still, the city moving the way it always does, unaware of what had just happened in a small private room a few floors above. I stood there for a moment, not thinking about what I had lost, but about what I had just taken back. Control. Clarity. Finality. And for the first time in months, everything felt simple again.